The dust-choked trail had been Adelaide Kemp's only companion for 3 days before disaster struck. Her cart wheel caught on a rock, sending her flying from her seat and crashing against the unforgiving ground of the South Dakota Territory in the summer of 1878. Pain shot through her body as consciousness faded, the vast prairie stretching endlessly around her broken form, miles from the promise of Sioux Falls and a new beginning. Wade O'Malley spotted the overturned cart from a distance, the silhouette breaking the smooth line of the horizon. He'd been riding fence line for his small ranch when the unusual shape caught his attention. Spurring his chestnut gelding forward, he approached cautiously, one hand resting on the revolver at his hip, a necessary precaution in these parts. As he drew closer, his eyes widened at the sight of a woman's form lying motionless beside the wrecked cart. "Hello there," he called out, keeping a safe distance. When no response came, he dismounted with fluid grace born from years in the saddle. The woman lay face down, her dusty dress torn at the shoulder, a small trickle of blood matting her honey-blonde hair. With gentle hands, Wade carefully turned her over, revealing a face that, despite being smudged with dirt and lined with pain, struck him as uncommonly beautiful. Her breathing was shallow but present, and a nasty gash crossed her forehead. "Miss," he tapped her cheek lightly. "Can you hear me, miss?" Adelaide's eyelids fluttered, consciousness returning in fragments. A man's face swam into view, weathered by sun and wind, with kind eyes the color of a summer sky and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard. "Water," she managed to croak, her throat parched from the dust and heat. Wade quickly retrieved his canteen, supporting her head as she drank. "Easy now, not too fast." After a few small sips, Adelaide tried to rise, only to gasp and fall back as pain lanced through her right ankle. "My leg," she whimpered. Wade examined her ankle with careful hands. "Looks sprained, maybe worse, and you've got a nasty cut on your head." His eyes scanned the horizon. "We're a good 20 miles from Sioux Falls. My place is closer, about 5 miles east." "I can't," Adelaide began, attempting once more to sit up. The world spun dizzyingly around her and she slumped back. "You can't stay out here," Wade said firmly. "Night's coming, and with it coyotes and worse." He hesitated, then added, "I know it's not proper, madam, but I need to get you somewhere safe. My ranch is small, but it's solid and you need care." Adelaide's eyes met his, searching for any sign of ill intent. Finding none, she nodded weakly. "What's your name, miss?" Wade asked as he gathered her belongings from the cart. "Adelaide Kemp," she replied. "Adelaide Jane Kemp." "Wade O'Malley," he returned with a slight tip of his hat. "I'll salvage what I can from your cart and come back for the rest tomorrow." With careful movements, he helped Adelaide onto his horse, then mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist to keep her from falling. Her body was warm against his chest, her hair carrying the faint scent of lavender despite days of travel. "I will not leave you," he said softly as they set off. "You're safe now, Miss Kemp." Adelaide said nothing, but leaned back slightly into his solid presence, too weak and in too much pain to maintain proper distance. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the security of Wade's arm around her waist lulled her back into unconsciousness. When she next opened her eyes, she was lying on a narrow but clean bed in a simple cabin. A cool cloth rested on her forehead, and her ankle had been carefully bandaged. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of a lantern on a nearby table. Through the single window, she could see that night had fallen. "You're awake." Adelaide turned her head to see Wade rising from a chair in the corner. He approached with a cup of water, which she accepted gratefully. "How long was I?" "A few hours," he answered. "You've got a fever. That cut on your head is infected." Adelaide reached up to touch her forehead, finding a bandage there. "You've been tending to me all this time," Wade nodded, a slight flush coloring his tanned cheeks. "I've had some practice. Ranch work comes with its share of injuries." He sat on the edge of a chair beside the bed. "If you don't mind me asking, Miss Kemp, what brings a lady like yourself out here alone?" Adelaide attempted to sit up, and Wade quickly moved to help her, arranging pillows behind her back. Their eyes met briefly, and both looked away. "I'm headed to Sioux Falls," she explained, adjusting the blanket across her lap. "My cousin Sarah lives there with her husband. I'm to help with their children and their mercantile." "You've come a long way, then, from Philadelphia." She twisted the edge of the blanket between her fingers. "After my parents died of influenza last winter, there wasn't much left for me there." Wade's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Adelaide replied, looking around the cabin. It was small but neat, with a stone fireplace at one end, a table with 2 chairs, a cooking area, and the bed she currently occupied. "Where will you sleep tonight?" "Don't worry about me," Wade said with a small smile. "I've got a bedroll by the fire. I've slept in worse places." Adelaide frowned. "I'm putting you out of your bed. You should rest," Wade interrupted gently. "That ankle won't heal if you keep trying to stand on it." As if to emphasize his point, a sharp pain shot through her leg when she shifted. Adelaide winced. "I'll make us some supper," Wade said, moving to the small stove. "Nothing fancy, just beans and bacon, but it'll fill your stomach." Adelaide watched as he moved about the cabin with practiced efficiency. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders and hands roughened by work. His dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and despite his rugged appearance, there was a gentleness in his movements that put her at ease. "Mr. O'Malley," she began hesitantly, "I appreciate your kindness, but I can't stay here. My cousin will be expecting me." Wade turned from the stove. "Miss Kemp, you've got a fever, an infected wound, and a bad ankle. You're not going anywhere for at least a few days. I can ride into town tomorrow and let your cousin know what happened." "But it's not proper out here. Survival comes before propriety," Wade said simply. "I promise you'll be safe with me. I'll sleep by the fire, and as soon as you're well enough, I'll take you to your cousin's." He stirred the contents of the pot. "For now, just focus on getting better." Adelaide wanted to protest further, but exhaustion washed over her in a wave. She sank back against the pillows, conceding defeat for the moment. They ate in a comfortable silence, Wade bringing a tray to her bed. The food was simple but surprisingly good, and Adelaide realized how hungry she had been. After the meal, Wade checked her bandages, his touch clinical but gentle. "The fever's still there," he said, his brow furrowing with concern. "I'll make a poultice of herbs that should help draw out the infection." "You know about healing?" Adelaide asked, surprised. Wade's expression grew distant. "My mother taught me." She learned from a Lakota woman who helped her once. He busied himself with gathering dried plants from small bundles hanging from the ceiling rafters. "Get some rest, Miss Kemp. I'll wake you when the poultice is ready." Adelaide found herself studying him as he worked. "How long have you been out here alone, Mr. O'Malley?" "5 years," he answered without looking up. "Came west after the war with what was left of my family's money and bought this land. Started with a few head of cattle and worked my way up from there." "The war? You fought?" Wade nodded, still focused on his task. "Union Army, Pennsylvania 83rd Infantry." "We're from the same state, then," Adelaide noted with surprise. That drew his gaze up to meet hers. "Pittsburgh," he said. "You, Philadelphia, as I mentioned." A small smile curved Wade's lips. "Worlds apart, even in the same state." "Yet here we are," Adelaide mused, "both far from home." "This is my home now," Wade replied, returning to his work. "Can't imagine going back east." Adelaide watched him crush the dried herbs with practiced movements. "Do you never get lonely out here?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. His hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. "Sometimes," he admitted quietly, "but there's peace in solitude." Before Adelaide could respond, a wave of dizziness swept over her. She closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. "Miss Kemp." Wade was at her side instantly, his hand cool against her flushed cheek. "The fever's getting worse. Let me get that poultice on." The next few hours passed in a haze for Adelaide. She was vaguely aware of Wade applying the pungent mixture to her forehead, of his voice murmuring reassurances when she moaned in discomfort, of his hand holding hers when the fever peaked and left her shivering despite the summer heat. "Stay with me," she thought she heard him whisper at one point, but couldn't be sure if it was real or a fever dream. Dawn was breaking when Adelaide finally opened her eyes, her mind clear for the first time since her fall. Wade was slumped in the chair beside her bed, his head resting at an awkward angle against the wall, clearly having kept vigil through the night. In sleep, the hard lines of his face softened, making him look younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps not much older than her own 24 years. She tried to shift position without waking him, but a floorboard creaked beneath the bed, and his eyes snapped open immediately. For a moment, he appeared disoriented, then his gaze focused on her. "The fever broke," he said with evident relief, reaching out to touch her forehead. His fingers lingered a moment longer than necessary, and Adelaide felt a curious warmth that had nothing to do with her recent fever. "Thanks to your care," she replied softly. "You stayed up all night," Wade shrugged, standing to stretch his tall frame. "Didn't want to risk the fever getting worse." He moved to the window, pushing aside the simple curtain to look out at the dawn-lit landscape. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Adelaide said, though her body ached and her ankle throbbed dully. "I believe I might even manage to sit at the table for breakfast with some help." Wade turned back to her with a small smile. "Let's not push our luck just yet, Miss Kemp." "Adelaide," she corrected him. "After all we've been through, I think we can dispense with formalities, don't you?" Something flickered in Wade's eyes, surprise, followed by something warmer. "Adelaide," he repeated as though testing the feel of her name. "Then you must call me Wade." The day passed quietly. True to his word, Wade helped Adelaide to the table for lunch, his arm strong around her waist as she hopped awkwardly on her good foot. The simple act of sitting upright at a table lifted her spirits considerably. "I need to check on the cattle," Wade said as they finished their meal. "Will you be all right alone for a couple of hours?" Adelaide nodded. "I'll be fine. I have a book in my trunk if you brought it in." "I did." Wade retrieved her small trunk from beside the door and placed it within her reach. "I've left water on the table here, and there's more in the pitcher if you need it. Don't try to walk on your own." "I won't," Adelaide promised, touched by his concern. When Wade had gone, Adelaide opened her trunk and took out not only her book but also her journal and a small portrait of her parents. The cabin felt different without Wade's presence, quieter, emptier somehow. She found herself listening for his return even as she tried to focus on her reading. By late afternoon, worry began to gnaw at her. The position of the sun told her that more than the promised 2 hours had passed. Just as she was considering the impossible task of hobbling to the door to look out, she heard hoofbeats approaching. The door opened and Wade entered, looking tired but pleased. "Sorry I'm late," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Spotted a break in the fence and had to mend it." "I was beginning to worry," Adelaide admitted. Wade looked at her with surprise, then smiled. "Were you now?" Adelaide felt heat rising to her cheeks. "It's getting late, and I thought perhaps something had happened." "Nothing to worry about," Wade assured her, moving to the basin to wash the dust from his hands and face. though I appreciate the concern." As he dried his face, he added, "I was thinking I could ride into Sioux Falls tomorrow to let your cousin know what happened. I can't leave you alone all day in your condition, but a few hours should be manageable." "That would be very kind," Adelaide said. "They'll be worried if I don't arrive soon." "I'll leave at first light," Wade promised. "It's about a 3-hour ride there and back." That night, after a simple but satisfying supper, they sat near the fire. Wade had helped Adelaide to a chair with a footstool for her injured ankle, and she was content to watch the flames dance while he whittled a small piece of wood. "What are you making?" she asked, curious. Wade held up the half-formed carving. "A horse, I think. Never quite know until it's done." "You're a man of many talents," Adelaide observed. "Rancher, healer, carpenter." Wade laughed softly. "Jack of all trades, master of none, as they say. Out here you learn to do a bit of everything or you don't survive." "It must be a hard life," Adelaide mused. "Hard, yes," Wade agreed, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "But honest, free. Is freedom worth the solitude?" The question slipped out before Adelaide could stop it, Wade's hand stilled on the carving. For a long moment he was silent, staring into the flames. "I used to think so," he finally said, his voice low. "Now I'm not so sure." Their eyes met across the small space, and something unspoken passed between them. Adelaide felt her heart beat faster as Wade's gaze lingered on her face, warm and questioning. The moment was broken by a log shifting in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. Wade cleared his throat and returned to his carving. "It's getting late," he said after a while. "You should rest." With his help, Adelaide returned to the bed. As he adjusted the pillow beneath her injured ankle, his hands were careful, almost reverent. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Wade's expression gentled. "Sleep well, Adelaide." In the morning, Adelaide awoke to find Wade already dressed and preparing to leave for Sioux Falls. He had left a plate of biscuits and a pot of coffee on the table within her reach. "I've filled the water pitcher and left more wood for the fire," he told her, buckling on his gun belt. "I shouldn't be gone more than 4 hours at most." "Please tell Sarah I'm fine and will come as soon as I'm able," Adelaide said. "Her husband's name is Thomas Green and their mercantile is on Main Street." Wade nodded. "I know the place. Bought supplies there when I first settled here." He hesitated, then added, "Try not to walk around too much while I'm gone." "I promise," Adelaide said with a smile. "I'll be right here when you return." After Wade left, Adelaide found herself restless despite her injuries. She managed to hobble to the window, using a broom as a makeshift crutch, and looked out at the landscape. Wade's ranch was situated in a small valley, with gently rolling hills stretching to the horizon. A modest barn stood about 50 yards from the cabin, with a corral attached. Beyond that, she could see cattle grazing in the distance. It was beautiful in a stark, simple way so different from the crowded streets of Philadelphia. Adelaide could understand why Wade spoke of this place with such quiet passion. There was a peace here, a sense of possibility. Moving carefully around the cabin, Adelaide noted the small touches that made it a home book stacked neatly on a shelf, a hand-carved chest set on a small table, a colorful quilt that looked handmade. For a man living alone, Wade had created a space of surprising comfort. By the time she heard hoofbeats approaching, Adelaide had managed to straighten the bed and was back in the chair by the fire, her ankle elevated as instructed. The door opened, and Wade entered, looking troubled. "What is it?" Adelaide asked immediately. "Is something wrong with my cousin?" Wade shook his head, removing his hat. "Your cousin and her family are fine. They were relieved to hear you're safe." He sat down heavily in the chair across from her. "But there's been trouble in town. Bank robbery yesterday. The sheriff was shot." Adelaide gasped. "Is he?" "He'll live," Wade assured her. "But the town's on edge. The robbers got away with a substantial sum, and there's talk they might be holed up in the hills not far from here." "How terrible," Adelaide said, unconsciously reaching out to touch Wade's arm. "Were you able to speak with my cousin?" Wade nodded, his expression softening slightly. "She wanted to come back with me to see you, but I convinced her to wait until you're stronger. The roads aren't safe right now with those robbers still at large." He covered her hand with his own. "I hope that was all right." "Yes," Adelaide said, oddly relieved. "I wouldn't want to worry her more by having her see me like this." Wade's eyes searched her face. "Your cousin mentioned you were coming to help with the children because of her condition." Adelaide nodded. "Sarah's expecting her third child in the winter. She needs help with the little ones and in the store." "She seems to think you'll be staying permanently," Wade observed carefully. Adelaide lowered her eyes. "That was the plan. There's nothing left for me in Philadelphia now." Wade was quiet for a moment. "I brought back some supplies," he said finally, standing, "including proper bandages for that ankle." As he tended to her injury with gentle hands, Adelaide found herself studying his face, the furrow of concentration between his brows, the way his lips pressed together as he worked, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes that spoke of frequent smiles despite his often serious demeanor. "You're staring," Wade said without looking up from his task. Adelaide felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sorry. I was just thinking how fortunate I am that you found me." Now Wade did look up, his blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I'm beginning to think I'm the fortunate one," he said quietly. The days that followed settled into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Adelaide's ankle improved enough that she could move around the cabin with the aid of a walking stick Wade had fashioned for her, though longer distances still required his support. Her head wound healed clean, leaving only a faint red line that Wade assured her would fade with time. They fell into a pattern of shared meals and quiet evenings by the fire. Wade taught Adelaide to play chess, and she proved a quick study, beating him by their third game. In turn, she read aloud from one of his books, Thoreau's Walden, which seemed fitting given their surroundings. Sometimes they simply talked, sharing stories of their lives before circumstances had brought them together. Wade told her about growing up in Pittsburgh, the son of a factory foreman, about joining the Union Army at 18, full of idealism that didn't survive the horrors of Gettysburg, about returning to find his father dead from pneumonia and the family savings nearly gone, about heading west with dreams of open skies and the freedom to build something of his own. Adelaide spoke of her sheltered childhood in Philadelphia society, her passion for books that her father had encouraged and her mother had tolerated, of the devastating influenza epidemic that had taken both her parents within a week of each other, of the crushing loneliness of the big house afterward, and the letter from Sarah that had offered an escape. "I've never really been on my own before," Adelaide admitted one evening as they sat on the small porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Until the journey here, I'd never even traveled without a companion." "You're braver than you give yourself credit for," Wade said, his profile outlined in gold by the fading light. "Many women wouldn't have attempted such a journey alone." "I didn't feel brave when you found me," Adelaide said with a rueful smile. Wade turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Bravery isn't about not falling, Adelaide. It's about getting back up." Their eyes held, and Adelaide felt something shift between them, a deepening of the connection that had been building since the day he had found her broken and alone on the prairie. A week after her accident, Adelaide woke in the night to the sound of rain drumming on the roof. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the cabin, followed by a boom of thunder that seemed to shake the very walls. She sat up, momentarily disoriented. "Just a summer storm," came Wade's voice from near the fireplace. She could make out his silhouette as he added wood to the dying embers. "They can be fierce out here, but the cabin's solid." "I didn't mean to wake you," Adelaide said, pulling the blanket around her shoulders against the sudden chill. "You didn't," Wade assured her, coming to sit on the edge of the bed. In the dim light, his face was all planes and shadows. "I was already up, never could sleep well during storms." Another flash of lightning revealed the tension in his jaw. Adelaide reached out instinctively, her hand finding his in the darkness. "The war?" she asked softly. Wade's fingers tightened around hers. "Some memories don't fade, no matter how much time passes." Adelaide moved over slightly, making room beside her. "Sit with me until the storm passes." In the brief hesitation that followed, Adelaide thought she might have overstepped, but then Wade moved to sit beside her, his back against the headboard, their shoulders touching. They sat in companionable silence as the storm raged outside, Wade's hand still holding hers between them. "Tell me about your dream for this place," Adelaide said after a while, wanting to distract him from whatever dark memories the storm had stirred. She felt rather than saw his smile in the darkness. "It's not much to look at now, I know, but I've got good water rights and fertile grazing land. In 5 years I could triple my herd if all goes well. And then," Wade was quiet for a moment, "I'd like to build a proper house," he said finally. "Something with more than one room, maybe plant some trees around it for shade in the summer, put in a vegetable garden." "It sounds lovely," Adelaide murmured, trying to picture it. "It's always been just a dream," Wade said, his voice low. "The kind of place a man would want to bring a family to." The word hung between them in the darkness. Family. Adelaide felt Wade tense beside her as though he had said more than he intended. "I should let you get back to sleep," he said, starting to rise. Adelaide tightened her grip on his hand. "Stay," she whispered. "Please, just until the storm passes." After a moment's hesitation, Wade settled back beside her. Adelaide leaned her head against his shoulder, and gradually she felt the tension leave his body. The steady sound of the rain and the solid warmth of Wade beside her lulled her back toward sleep. Just before she drifted off, Adelaide thought she felt the gentle press of lips against her hair, so light it might have been a dream. When she awoke the next morning, Wade was gone from beside her, but the impression of his body on the blanket remained. He was at the stove, his back to her as he prepared breakfast. "Good morning," Adelaide said, sitting up and smoothing her hair. Wade turned, a hint of uncertainty in his expression. "Good morning. How's the ankle today?" Adelaide flexed her foot experimentally. "Much better. I think I could walk without the stick, at least around the cabin." Wade nodded, bringing a plate of eggs to her. "That's good progress." He seemed to be avoiding her eyes. "Wade," Adelaide began, but he had already moved back to the stove. "I need to ride out to check the north pasture today," he said, his voice deliberately casual. The storm might have spooked the cattle. Adelaide felt a tightness in her chest. He was pulling away, retreating behind the polite distance they had gradually abandoned over the past week. Because of what had happened last night, or almost happened. "Wade," she tried again, more firmly this time. "Look at me, please." He turned slowly, his expression guarded. "Thank you for staying with me during the storm," Adelaide said simply. "It helped." Something in Wade's face softened. "I'm glad," he said quietly. The moment stretched between them, filled with things unsaid. Then Wade broke eye contact, returning to his breakfast preparations. "Your cousin sent some things for you," he said, changing the subject. "Clothes and such. They're in that bundle by the door." Adelaide accepted the shift in conversation, though her thoughts remained on the way his hand had felt in hers in the darkness, the solid comfort of his presence beside her. That was kind of her. I'll have to thank her when I see her. Wade glanced up at that. About that. Your ankle seems to be healing well. Another day or two and you should be fit to travel to Sioux Falls if you wish. The words were spoken casually, but Adelaide caught the question beneath them. If you wish. Yes, she said slowly. I suppose I should be able to travel soon. Wade nodded, his expression unreadable as he set a plate before her. They ate in silence, the easy companionship of previous meals replaced by a tangible tension. After breakfast, Wade prepared to leave for his daily tasks. At the door, he paused, his hat in his hands. Adelaide, about last night, it's all right, she interrupted, not wanting to hear him apologize for a moment that had meant so much to her. The storm, the darkness, it's natural to seek comfort. Wade's brow furrowed slightly. Is that what you think it was, just seeking comfort? Adelaide's heart began to beat faster. What else would it be? For a long moment, Wade looked at her as though searching for something in her face. Then, with a small shake of his head, he placed his hat on and turned to the door. I'll be back before sundown. Left alone, Adelaide moved around the cabin restlessly, testing her ankle's strength. It was healing well. She could put weight on it now with only minimal discomfort. The realization brought mixed emotions. On one hand, she was relieved to be regaining her independence. On the other, it meant her time with Wade was drawing to a close. The thought created an unexpected ache in her chest. In just over a week, this small cabin had begun to feel like home in a way her cousin's house in Sioux Falls, a place she had never even seen, did not. And Wade. Adelaide sank into a chair, facing the truth she had been avoiding. She had developed feelings for her rescuer, feelings that went far beyond gratitude. His kindness, his quiet strength, the gentle way he tended to her injuries all had combined to create something she had never experienced before. Something that felt dangerously like love. But what of Wade's feelings? Sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression that made her heart race. There had been moments like last night during the storm when she felt certain he cared for her as more than just a responsibility. But then he would retreat behind a wall of polite distance, leaving her wondering if she had imagined the connection between them. Adelaide spent the day sorting through the bundle. Sarah had sent a few simple dresses, undergarments, a brush and comb, and a letter expressing concern for her well-being and eagerness to see her. The letter mentioned how much the children were looking forward to meeting their Aunt Adelaide, and detailed plans for her room in their home above the mercantile. It should have filled Adelaide with anticipation. Instead, it felt like reading about a life intended for someone else. By late afternoon, dark clouds had begun to gather on the horizon again. Adelaide watched anxiously from the window, hoping Wade would return before another storm broke. The wind picked up, bending the tall prairie grass and sending dust swirling across the yard. When she finally heard hoofbeats approaching, relief washed over her. But as she opened the door, she realized it wasn't Wade returning. 3 riders were approaching the cabin strangers, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats. Adelaide's instincts screamed danger. She quickly closed and barred the door, her heart pounding. Through the window she watched as the men dismounted, their movements unhurried but purposeful. "Hello, the house," one called out. "We're looking for water and shelter from the coming storm." Adelaide remained silent, remembering Wade's warning about the bank robbers hiding in the hills. Could these be the men? A knock came at the door, hard and insistent. "We know someone's in there. Saw you at the window, madam." Adelaide glanced frantically around the cabin, looking for a weapon. Wade's rifle was gone. He had taken it with him, but there was a small derringer in the drawer beside the bed. Sarah had insisted she carry it on her journey for protection, though Adelaide had never fired a gun in her life. Her fingers closed around the cool metal as the knocking grew louder. "Last chance before we let ourselves in," the voice called, all pretense of politeness gone. Adelaide took a deep breath. "I'm armed," she called out, proud of how steady her voice sounded, "and I'm expecting company at any moment." Laughter came from outside. "Hear that, boys? The lady's expecting company." More laughter. "Well, madam, I'm afraid your company might be delayed. We came across a fella on the North Ridge, had a bit of a disagreement with him." Fear clenched Adelaide's heart. Wade had been checking the north pasture. "If you've heard him," she began, anger overtaking fear. "He's alive," the voice replied. "For now. But he took a nasty fall down a ravine trying to get away from us. Be a shame if no one found him before nightfall." Adelaide's mind raced. They could be lying to lure her out. Or they could be telling the truth, and Wade might be injured, needing help. "I don't believe you," she called back, though doubt crept into her voice. "Suit yourself, madam," came the reply. But he was wearing a brown leather vest and riding a chestnut horse. "Had a nice rifle we're making good use of." Adelaide's blood ran cold. The description matched Wade perfectly. "What do you want?" she asked, moving closer to the door. "Just shelter from the storm, maybe some food, and whatever valuables you might have around." "If I let you in, how do I know you won't harm me?" a different voice answered this time. "You don't, lady, but your chances are better in here than his are out there in that ravine." Adelaide closed her eyes briefly, weighing her options. If Wade truly was injured and alone as a storm approached, each passing minute decreased his chances of survival. "I'm coming out," she decided, tucking the derringer into the pocket of her dress. "But I'm still armed, and I will shoot if necessary." Taking a deep breath, Adelaide unbarred the door and stepped onto the porch, the derringer held steadily before her. The three men stood in the yard, their horses behind them. One had Wade's rifle slung across his back. "Where is he?" Adelaide demanded, her eyes moving between the three men. The apparent leader, a tall man with a scar across his left cheek, smiled unpleasantly. "Put down that little gun and we'll tell you." "Tell me first," Adelaide countered, surprised by her own boldness. The scarred man's smile faded. "North Ravine, about 2 miles from here." "Now lower that gun before you hurt yourself." Adelaide kept the derringer raised. "I'll need one of your horses." The men exchanged glances, then broke into laughter. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that," the scarred man said, "but you're not taking one of our horses." "Then you'll have to shoot me," Adelaide said, her voice surprisingly calm given the terror coursing through her. "Because I'm going to find him, with or without your help." Something in her tone gave the men pause. The scarred man studied her for a long moment, then nodded to one of his companions. "Give her the roan. Not like she'll get far with that pea-shooter." The third man, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Jed, we ain't got time for this. Storm's coming fast." "Shut up, Lyle," the scarred man Jed snapped. "The lady wants to play hero, let her." To Adelaide he added, "You've got an hour before that storm hits full force. Better ride fast." Adelaide kept the derringer trained on them as she made her way to the offered horse. Her ankle protested as she mounted awkwardly, but adrenaline dulled the pain. "North Ravine," she repeated. "How will I recognize it?" Jed pointed. "Follow that ridge line, can't miss it. It's the only cut in the rock for miles." His smile returned, cold and menacing. "We'll make ourselves at home while you're gone, maybe have supper ready for your return. If you return." Without another word, Adelaide urged the horse forward, riding in the direction Jed had indicated. The wind was picking up, carrying the scent of rain, and thunder rumbled in the distance. She had no idea if Wade was really in the ravine, or if this was an elaborate trick to get her away from the cabin. But she couldn't take the chance that he was injured and alone as a storm approached. Adelaide rowed hard, ignoring the pain in her ankle and the fear in her heart. The landscape was unfamiliar, but she kept her eyes on the ridge line Jed had pointed out. After what seemed an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, she spotted a deep cut in the earth ahead the ravine. "Wade," she called, her voice whipped away by the wind. "Wade, can you hear me?" No answer came. Adelaide dismounted carefully, wincing as her injured ankle took her weight. She approached the edge of the ravine cautiously, peering down into the shadowy depths. The sides were steep but not vertical, littered with loose rock and scrubby vegetation. "Wade." She called again, more desperately this time. A faint sound came from below, not a voice, but a scraping noise, like someone moving on loose rock. Adelaide squinted into the growing darkness, and her heart leapt as she made out a figure about 30 feet down, clinging to the ravine wall. "Adelaide." Wade's voice floated up, weak but unmistakable. "Is that you?" "Yes," she cried, relief washing over her. "I'm here. Get away from here," Wade called back, his voice strained. "3 men robbers there, I know," Adelaide interrupted. "They're at the cabin. They told me where to find you." Even from this distance, she could see Wade's confusion. "They told you?" Why would they? A deafening crack of thunder cut him off as the storm finally broke overhead. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, quickly turning the ground beneath Adelaide's feet to mud. "We need to get you out of there," she shouted over the storm. "The ravine could flood." Wade shook his head, grimacing with pain. "My leg's broken. I can't climb." Adelaide looked around frantically, searching for something, anything that could help. The horse had wandered several yards away, seeking shelter beneath a stand of trees. Inspiration struck, and she hobbled toward it as quickly as her injured ankle would allow. Retrieving the horse's reins, she led it back to the edge of the ravine. She quickly unbuckled the saddle and removed it, then unwound the long leather lariat that had been secured to it. "I'm going to lower a rope," she called down to Wade. "Can you tie it around yourself?" Wade nodded, though the movement seemed to cause him pain. Adelaide tied one end of the lariat securely around the saddle, then placed the saddle on the ground and sat on it for extra weight. She lowered the other end of the rope down to Wade, watching anxiously as he struggled to secure it around his chest with one hand. The other arm appeared to be injured as well. "Ready," she called when he finally gave her a thumbs up. "Ready," he confirmed. Adelaide led the horse forward slowly, using it to pull on the rope. The strain on her injured ankle was excruciating as she braced herself to help guide Wade's ascent, but she gritted her teeth and held firm. Inch by agonizing inch, Wade was pulled up the side of the ravine. The rain made the rocks slick and treacherous, and more than once he slipped, his weight jerking painfully on the rope Adelaide helped to hold. But gradually, he neared the top. With a final heave, Wade reached the edge and Adelaide rushed forward to help pull him onto solid ground. He collapsed beside her, his face pale with pain and exhaustion, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "You came for me," he gasped, his blue eyes searching her face with wonder. "Of course I did," Adelaide replied, rain mingling with tears on her cheeks. "I will not leave you, Wade." Not ever. The simple declaration seemed to give him strength. Despite his injuries, Wade reached up to touch her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. "Adelaide," he whispered, her name on his lips like a prayer. A violent gust of wind reminded them of their precarious position. "We need shelter," Adelaide said, reluctantly breaking the moment. "Can you ride?" Wade nodded grimly. With help. Together they managed to resaddle the horse, though the task was made difficult by Wade's broken leg and injured arm. Finally, with Adelaide's support, Wade mounted, then reached down to pull her up behind him. The horse protested the double burden but held steady. "The cabin's not safe," Adelaide shouted over the howling wind. "Those men, I know a place," Wade interrupted. "An old line shack about a mile east. Hold on tight." Adelaide wrapped her arms around his waist as Wade guided the horse forward through the driving rain. She could feel him trembling with pain and cold beneath her hands, but his determination never wavered. The journey seemed endless, with the storm growing more violent around them. Lightning split the sky in jagged forks, illuminating the landscape in brief, stark flashes. The horse struggled through mud that grew deeper with each passing minute. Finally, just as Adelaide was beginning to fear they would never find shelter, a small structure loomed out of the darkness, a crude, one-room shack that looked as though it might collapse in the next strong gust of wind. But it was sanctuary from the storm, and Adelaide could have wept with relief at the sight of it. Wade dismounted with difficulty, nearly collapsing as his broken leg touched the ground. Adelaide quickly slid down beside him, taking as much of his weight as she could despite her own injury. Together, they staggered to the shack's door, which hung crookedly on rusted hinges. Inside, the shack was dusty and abandoned but blessedly dry. A small fireplace stood against one wall, and rough wooden bunks lined another. Wade collapsed onto one of these, his face contorted with pain. "We need to get you warm and dry," Adelaide said, fighting her own exhaustion to focus on Wade's more serious injuries. "Firewood in the corner," Wade managed through clenched teeth. "Matches on the shelf." Adelaide found both where he indicated and set about building a fire with hands that shook from cold and fading adrenaline. The wood was old and dry, and soon a small blaze crackled in the fireplace, casting flickering light and blessed warmth throughout the tiny space. Returning to Wade's side, Adelaide helped him remove his sodden coat and boots. His left leg was clearly broken, the ankle twisted at an unnatural angle, and his right arm bore a deep gash that still oozed blood. "We need to set that leg," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Wade nodded, his face grim. "There should be supplies in that trunk. Old Jeb Wilson used this place as a hunting cabin, always kept it stocked." Adelaide found the trunk at the foot of one of the bunks. Inside were basic medical supplies, some canned food and, thankfully, several blankets that smelled musty but were dry. "You've done this before?" Wade asked as she returned with splints fashioned from pieces of wood and strips torn from one of the blankets. Adelaide shook her head, her hands trembling slightly. "I've read about it." A ghost of a smile touched Wade's lips despite his pain. "Of course you have." The next hour was a test of both their endurance. Adelaide set Wade's broken leg as best she could, her heart breaking at his muffled cries of pain. She cleaned and bandaged the gash on his arm, relieved to find it looked worse than it was. Throughout it all, Wade remained conscious, his eyes never leaving her face, as though drawing strength from her presence. When she had done all she could, Adelaide helped Wade into dry clothes found in the trunk, then changed into a rough shirt herself, hanging their wet garments near the fire to dry. "You're limping worse," Wade observed, his voice weak but concerned. "Your ankle is fine," Adelaide assured him, though in truth it throbbed mercilessly. "Just a bit sore from the exertion." She settled beside him on the narrow bunk, pulling the blankets over them both for warmth. Outside, the storm continued to rage, rain lashing against the small window and wind howling through the cracks in the walls. But inside, in the glow of the fire, they were safe. Wade's good arm wrapped around her shoulders, drawing her closer. "You saved my life," he murmured against her hair. Adelaide rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You saved mine first," she reminded him. "Those men," Wade said after a moment, tension entering his voice. "When they find we're not coming back." "They'll leave when the storm passes," Adelaide said with more confidence than she felt. They wanted shelter, not a confrontation. Wade wasn't convinced. "They're the bank robbers from Sioux Falls. I recognized one of them from descriptions in town. They're dangerous, Adelaide." "We'll worry about that tomorrow," she said firmly. "For now, you need to rest and regain your strength." Wade's hand found hers beneath the blanket, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Why did you come for me?" he asked softly. "You could have hidden in the cabin, waited for help." Adelaide raised her head to meet his gaze, finding the courage to speak the truth that had been growing in her heart. "Because the thought of losing you was unbearable," she whispered. Something fierce and tender blazed in Wade's eyes. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing lightly across her skin. "Adelaide," he said, her name a caress on his lips. "I've been fighting this since the day I found you, telling myself it was too soon, that you were meant for a different life. But I can't fight it anymore." "Then don't," Adelaide said simply, leaning into his touch. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, at first a question, an offering. Then, as Adelaide responded, it deepened into something more profound, a promise exchanged without words. Wade's hand tangled in her hair, drawing her closer as though he feared she might disappear if he let go. When they finally parted, both breathless, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words rough with emotion. "I think I've loved you since I first saw you lying there in the dust, too stubborn to give up." Adelaide laughed softly, tears of joy springing to her eyes. "And I love you, Wade O'Malley, my rescuer, my home." They fell asleep in each other's arms, the storm raging outside forgotten in the peace they had found within. Morning brought clear skies and difficult decisions. Wade's injuries, while serious, weren't life-threatening if properly treated. But they needed to get to town for proper medical attention, and the three robbers were still a threat. "We can't stay here," Wade said as Adelaide helped him sit up. "They might come looking for us once they realize we're not returning to the cabin." "You're in no condition to travel far," Adelaide protested, concern etched on her face. Wade grimaced as he tested his splinted leg. "We don't have much choice. We need to get to Sioux Falls." After a simple breakfast of canned beans found in the trunk, they prepared to leave. The horse had sheltered beneath the shack's small overhang during the storm and seemed relatively fresh. With Adelaide's help, Wade mounted, then pulled her up behind him. "Stay alert," Wade cautioned as they set off, his rifle recovered from the supplies in the lined shack across his lap. They could be anywhere. They traveled slowly, Wade fighting pain with every jarring step of the horse. Adelaide held him securely from behind, lending him her strength. The landscape had been transformed by the storm. Streams had formed where none had existed before, and parts of the trail were washed out entirely. They had been riding for perhaps an hour when Wade suddenly tensed. "Riders coming," he said quietly, nodding toward a ridge ahead. Adelaide felt fear course through her. "Is it them?" Wade squinted against the morning sun. "Can't tell yet, but whoever it is, they're heading this way fast." He guided their horse off the trail into a stand of trees, seeking cover. As they watched anxiously, the approaching riders came into view, 5 men, one of whom wore a star on his vest. The sheriff's posse from Sioux Falls. Relief washed over Adelaide. "They're friendlies," she said, touching Wade's arm. "Look at the badge." Wade emerged from cover, waving to attract the posse's attention. The riders altered course, approaching cautiously until they recognized Wade. "O'Malley," the sheriff called as they drew near. "We were heading to your place. Your lady's cousin raised the alarm when you didn't return yesterday." "Sheriff Blackwood," Wade greeted him, tension visibly leaving his body. "Am I glad to see you?" The sheriff's eyes took in Wade's splinted leg and the exhaustion evident on both their faces. "Looks like you two have had a rough time of it. What happened?" Quickly, Wade explained about the 3 robbers, the ravine, and their night in the line shack. As he spoke, the sheriff's expression darkened. "Those are our bank robbers, all right," he confirmed. "We've been tracking them since they hit the bank. Thought they might head for the hills around your place." He glanced at the sun's position. "If they stayed the night at your cabin, they might still be there. Or they might have moved on after the storm," Adelaide added. Sheriff Blackwood considered this. "Either way, you two need to get to town. Jenkins," he called to one of his men, "escort Mr. O'Malley and the lady to Sioux Falls. The rest of us will check out the cabin." The deputy named Jenkins nodded, moving his horse alongside theirs. "We'll take it slow, sir," he assured Wade, noting his obvious pain. They parted ways with the sheriff and the remainder of the posse, Jenkins leading them on a more direct route to town. Despite the deputy's care in choosing the smoothest path, the journey was agonizing for Wade, whose face grew increasingly pale as they traveled. Adelaide held him tightly, whispering encouragement when his strength seemed to flag. "Not much further now," she murmured. "Stay with me, Wade." "Always," he promised through gritted teeth. By the time they reached Sioux Falls, Wade was barely conscious, clinging to the saddle horn with his good hand. The town doctor was summoned immediately, and Wade was carried into the clinic while Adelaide was swept into her cousin Sarah's tearful embrace. "We were so worried," Sarah cried, her pregnant belly pressing against Adelaide as they hugged. "When Mr. O'Malley didn't return yesterday, Thomas insisted something must be wrong." "It's a long story," Adelaide said, her eyes never leaving Wade as he was carried into the examination room. "But we're safe now." Sarah followed her gaze, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You care for him," she said softly. Adelaide turned to her cousin, no longer willing or able to hide her feelings. "I love him, Sarah. I know it's sudden and perhaps it seems foolish." Sarah stopped her with a gentle squeeze of her hand. "Love is never foolish, Adelaide. And there's nothing like danger to reveal what's truly in our hearts." She studied Adelaide's face. "Does he feel the same?" "He does," Adelaide confirmed, a smile breaking through her exhaustion. We spoke of it last night." "Then I'm happy for you," Sarah said sincerely. "Mr. O'Malley has a reputation as a good man in these parts, keeps to himself, but always fair in his dealings." Adelaide glanced toward the closed door of the examination room. "Will you stay with me while we wait for news?" "Of course," Sarah replied, leading her to a bench. "Thomas is with the children at home, but I'm not going anywhere." It was nearly an hour before the doctor emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. Adelaide stood immediately, her heart in her throat. "He'll be fine," the doctor assured her, seeing her anxiety. "The leg was set properly, good work there, and the cut on his arm needed stitches but isn't serious. He's exhausted and has lost some blood, but with rest and care, he'll make a full recovery." Adelaide felt her knees weaken with relief. Sarah steadied her, arm around her waist. "Can I see him?" Adelaide asked. The doctor nodded. Briefly. "He needs rest, but he's been asking for you." Wade was propped up on a narrow bed, his leg properly splinted and elevated, his arm bandaged. Despite his injuries, his face brightened when Adelaide entered the room. "There you are," he said, reaching for her with his good hand. "The doctor says you did a fine job with my leg." Adelaide took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I had a good patient. A stubborn one, more like," Wade said with a weak smile. They looked at each other, the events of the past day, the terror, the confessions, the kisses hanging between them. "Adelaide," Wade began, his expression growing serious. "What I said last night, I meant every word," Adelaide interrupted softly, "and I hope you did too." "With all my heart," Wade assured her, tugging her hand to bring her closer. "I love you, Adelaide Kemp, and when I'm back on my feet, I intend to court you properly if you'll allow it." Adelaide leaned down to press her lips gently to his. "I'll allow it," she whispered against his mouth. "Though I'd say we're well beyond the courting stage after all we've been through together." Wade's laugh was interrupted by a tap at the door. Sarah entered hesitantly, followed by the sheriff. "Sorry to interrupt," Sheriff Blackwood said, nodding respectfully to Adelaide. "But I thought you'd want to know we caught them. All three of the bank robbers were still at your cabin, O'Malley. They surrendered without much of a fight once they saw they were outnumbered." Relief washed over Wade's face. "That's good news, Sheriff. Thank you." "Your cabin's a bit of a mess," the sheriff added apologetically. "Looks like they helped themselves to your supplies and didn't clean up after themselves." "It doesn't matter," Wade said, his eyes finding Adelaide's. "It's just a structure. What matters is safe." The sheriff tipped his hat. "I'll need statements from both of you when you're feeling up to it, but it can wait. Rest now." After he left, Sarah approached the bed, smiling warmly at Wade. "Mr. O'Malley, I want to thank you for taking care of my cousin. If there's anything Thomas or I can do to help with your recovery, you need only ask." "Thank you, Mrs. Green," Wade replied. "But it was your cousin who saved me, not the other way around." Sarah's eyes twinkled as she glanced between them. "I can see you've both been taking care of each other." She touched Adelaide's shoulder. "I'll leave you two alone for a bit, but then you need to come home with me and rest, Adelaide. You've had quite an ordeal yourself." When they were alone again, Wade tugged Adelaide down to sit on the edge of the bed. "Your cousin seems nice," he observed. "You'll be comfortable with her family while I recover." Adelaide frowned slightly. "And where exactly will you be recovering? Here, I suppose, until the doctor says I can travel. Then back to my ranch to rebuild what those men damaged." "Alone?" Adelaide asked, arching an eyebrow. Wade looked uncertain. "I wouldn't expect you to, Wade O'Malley," Adelaide interrupted, her voice firm despite her exhaustion. "If you think I'm going to let you go back to that ranch alone after everything we've been through, you've hit your head harder than we thought." A slow smile spread across Wade's face. "What exactly are you proposing, Miss Kemp?" "I'm proposing that I help you recover, just as you helped me," Adelaide said. "And then, when you're well enough, we can discuss more permanent arrangements." "Permanent arrangements," Wade repeated, his smile widening. "That sounds suspiciously like a proposal of your own." Adelaide felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Perhaps it is," she admitted. "Though I believe that's traditionally your role." Wade reached up to touch her face, his expression growing serious. "Adelaide, I love you. These past 2 weeks have shown me what my life could be with you in it, brighter, fuller, richer in all the ways that matter. I don't have much to offer yet, but everything I am and everything I have is yours if you want it." Tears welled in Adelaide's eyes. "That sounds very much like a proposal, Mr. O'Malley." "It is," Wade confirmed, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Will you marry me, Adelaide? Build a life with me on that little ranch. It won't be easy, but I promise to love you every day of my life." "Yes," Adelaide whispered, leaning down to kiss him. "Yes, I will marry you, Wade O'Malley." Their kiss was a promise, a beginning, sealed with the knowledge that they had found in each other not just love but a true partnership, one forged in danger and cemented by choice. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small church in Sioux Falls. Wade stood tall at the altar, leaning only slightly on a cane, his broken leg healing well but still tender. Adelaide walked toward him on Thomas Green's arm, her simple white dress adorned with wildflowers, her smile radiant. Sarah, now visibly pregnant, watched from the front pew, her two young children fidgeting beside her. Sheriff Blackwood and his wife attended, along with the doctor and several townspeople who had come to know the couple during Wade's recovery. It was a small gathering, but filled with genuine warmth and goodwill. The vows were simple but heartfelt, with Wade's voice steady and Adelaide's clear as they promised to love and cherish each other for all their days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Wade's kiss was both tender and possessive, drawing good-natured cheers from the assembled guests. The celebration afterward at the Greens' home above the Mercantile was modest but joyful. Adelaide moved through the small crowd with natural grace, her hand rarely leaving Wade's as they accepted congratulations and well wishes. "Happy?" Wade asked quietly during a rare moment alone, his arm around her waist as they stood near the window overlooking Main Street. Adelaide leaned into his embrace, contentment filling her heart. "Completely," she assured him, "though I'm eager to go home." Home. The word held new meaning now. During Wade's recovery, they had made plans for the ranch, expanding the cabin, adding the vegetable garden he had once spoken of, increasing the herd gradually as their resources allowed. Adelaide had discovered an unexpected aptitude for ranch life, embracing the challenges with the same determination she had shown in rescuing Wade from the ravine. "We leave tomorrow," Wade reminded her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Back to our land, our future." "Our adventure," Adelaide added with a smile. The journey back to the ranch the following day was a stark contrast to their first encounter. Instead of a broken cart and an injured woman, there was a sturdy wagon filled with wedding gifts and supplies. Instead of strangers thrown together by circumstance, there was a husband and wife beginning their life together. As they crested the final hill, and the small cabin came into view, Wade drew the wagon to a halt. The damage done by the bank robbers had been repaired during their time in town, thanks to neighbors who had rallied to help once they heard the story. "It's not much," Wade said, a hint of apology in his voice as he surveyed their modest home. "Certainly nothing like what you're used to in Philadelphia." Adelaide took his hand, her eyes on the simple cabin that represented everything she had never known she wanted. "It's perfect," she said softly, "because it's ours." Wade helped her down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms despite his still healing leg. "Tradition," he explained with a grin as he carried her across the threshold. Inside, the cabin was clean and ready for their return, with fresh curtains that Sarah had insisted on making as a wedding gift. A small vase of wildflowers sat on the table, a thoughtful touch from a neighbor. Wade set Adelaide gently on her feet, his arms remaining around her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Malley," he murmured, bending to kiss her. Adelaide wound her arms around his neck, returning his kiss with fervor. "I love the sound of that," she said when they finally parted, both breathless. "As do I," Wade agreed, his eyes darkening with desire. "And I intend to say it often." Later, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, they sat together on the small porch Wade had built during their engagement. Adelaide's head rested on her husband's shoulder, his arm secure around her as they watched the sun sink below the horizon. "I never imagined this would be my life," Adelaide mused, her fingers intertwined with Wade's. "When I left Philadelphia, I thought I was simply moving from one city to another, exchanging one type of existence for a similar one." Wade's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. Adelaide turned to face him, her expression serious. "Not one," she assured him. That fall from the cart was the best thing that ever happened to me because it brought me to you." Wade's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his eyes reflecting the last golden rays of sunlight. "I meant what I said that first day," he murmured. "I will not leave you, Adelaide, not ever." "Nor I you," she promised, sealing the vow with a kiss as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above their home. 5 years later, Adelaide stood at the same porch, watching as Wade taught their 4-year-old son James to ride his new pony. The boy's laughter carried across the yard, his dark hair so like his father's ruffled by the gentle summer breeze. "Not too fast, James," Adelaide called, her hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child grew. "Mind your father's instructions." "He's doing fine," Wade assured her, his hand steady on the pony's bridle. "A natural, just like his mother." Adelaide smiled at the compliment. The past 5 years had transformed her from a city-bred lady into a capable rancher's wife, who could ride as well as any man in the county, shoot with impressive accuracy, thanks to Wade's patient teaching, and manage the household accounts with the precision of a Philadelphia banker. The ranch had flourished under their joint care. The cabin had been expanded into a proper house with 3 bedrooms and a large kitchen where Adelaide experimented with recipes shared by neighboring ranch wives. The herd had grown steadily, providing enough income for comfort if not luxury. A small orchard of apple trees now stood where once there had been only prairie grass, and Adelaide's vegetable garden produced enough to see them through the winter months with plenty to share. Life wasn't always easy. There had been droughts and blizzards, a prairie fire that had nearly reached their home, and the usual challenges of frontier life. But they had faced each difficulty together, growing stronger as a couple with each obstacle overcome. "Mama, look," James called proudly as he sat straight in the small saddle. "I'm riding all by myself." "I see you, sweetheart," Adelaide called back, her heart swelling with pride and love. "You're doing wonderfully." Wade released the pony's bridle, letting James guide the gentle animal in a small circle. His gaze met Adelaide's across the yard, filled with the same love and partnership that had sustained them through 5 years of marriage. Later that evening, after James had been tucked into bed with a story about brave cowboys and the women who loved them, Wade and Adelaide sat before the fireplace in the comfortable chairs he had crafted during the long winter months. "I had a letter from Sarah today," Adelaide mentioned, her fingers busy with the tiny gown she was sewing for the baby due in autumn. "She says Thomas is considering expanding the mercantile. Business in Sioux Falls is booming." Wade nodded, looking up from the account book he was reviewing. "Town's growing fast. Might be good for us to consider selling more beef to the butcher there instead of driving the herd all the way to Sioux City." Adelaide agreed, setting aside her sewing to stretch her tired back. "That would mean you'd be home more." "A definite advantage," Wade said with a smile, rising to move behind her chair. His strong hands began to massage her shoulders, drawing a contented sigh from Adelaide. "You ever miss Philadelphia?" Wade asked, the question unexpected after all this time. Adelaide considered it honestly. "Sometimes I miss the concerts and the libraries," she admitted. "But I have music here." She nodded to the small piano Wade had surprised her with on their 3rd anniversary. "And books continue to arrive with satisfying regularity. And the things I've gained far outweigh anything I've lost." Wade's hands paused in their ministrations, such as Adelaide reached up to cover his hand with her own. Freedom, purpose, partnership. She tilted her head back to look up at him. "You, James, this little one." Her hand moved to her rounded belly, a life built with love at its foundation. Wade bent to kiss her, his lips warm and familiar against hers. "I thank God every day for that broken cartwheel," he murmured. Adelaide laughed softly. "As do I, though perhaps not in the moment it happened." They fell silent, listening to the crackling of the fire and the distant hooting of an owl outside. Their home was a haven of warmth and love in the vastness of the South Dakota prairie, a testament to what could be built from the most unexpected beginnings. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Adelaide asked after a while, her voice soft with memory. Wade came around to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I will not leave you," he recited, the words as true now as they had been that day. "And you never have," Adelaide said, her eyes shining with unshed tears of happiness. "Even when I tried to send you away, you stayed." "Best decision I ever made," Wade replied, lifting her hand to his lips. Later that night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, the future they had built together surrounding them in the quiet sounds of their home, Adelaide thought of the young woman who had left Philadelphia seeking a new beginning. She had found it, though in a way she could never have imagined. Not in the bustling town of Sioux Falls, but in a small ranch on the open prairie. Not in the security of her cousin's home, but in the arms of a man who had promised not to leave her and never had. "What are you thinking about?" Wade murmured sleepily beside her, his arm tightening around her waist. Adelaide turned in his embrace, pressing a kiss to his chest above his steadily beating heart. "About fate," she replied softly. "About how sometimes we think we know where we're going, but life has other plans." "Better plans," Wade added, his hand moving to rest protectively over their unborn child. "Much better," Adelaide agreed, closing her eyes as contentment washed over her. "Infinitely better." As she drifted toward sleep in the circle of her husband's arms, Adelaide knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, home, in every sense of the word, with the man who had found her when she was at her weakest and had pledged never to leave. A promise kept through danger and hardship, through joy and celebration, through the building of a life neither of them could have envisioned but both now cherished beyond measure. The fall from the cart had been her ending, and her beginning the moment that had set her on the path to true happiness. And for that, Adelaide would be forever grateful.